An immigrant janitor returned a lost wallet, unaware it held the keys to his own dream business. Miguel Reyes's calloused fingers trembled as he knelt on the polished marble floor of the Carrington building, his mop forgotten beside him. The black leather wallet lay open in his hands, its contents, several crisp $100 bills and a collection of credit cards, representing more money than he would see in a month of 18-hour days. The hallway stretched empty around him, silent except for the distant hum of the air conditioning system and the faint echo of his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. It was nearly midnight. No security cameras pointed at this particular stretch of corridor. No witnesses to what he might choose to do next. Miguel closed his eyes and felt the weight of exhaustion press down on his shoulders like a physical thing. 3 jobs, barely 5 hours of sleep a night. The constant, gnawing worry about his mother back in Guatemala, whose medication grew more expensive each month. The tiny apartment he shared with 2 other men, where he kept his few possessions in a locked trunk at the foot of his narrow bed. And yet, he snapped the wallet closed and slipped it into the pocket of his uniform. Not to keep, that thought never truly crossed his mind, but to return to its rightful owner. The identification card inside bore the name Daniel Harrington, alongside a corporate photo of a man about Miguel's age, though the similarities ended there. This man's face carried no worry lines, no hollow shadows beneath the eyes. This man had never wondered where his next meal would come from. "Senor Harrington," Miguel whispered to the empty hallway, his accent wrapping around the unfamiliar name. "I will find you." He finished his shift with the wallet burning a hole in his pocket, awareness of it prickling against his skin with each sweep of the mop, each emptied trash bin, each polished surface. By the time dawn broke across the New York skyline, Miguel had formulated his plan. He would deliver the wallet personally, not trust it to the building's lost and found where items had been known to disappear before reaching their rightful owners. The business card inside the wallet listed an address in the financial district, a 20-minute subway ride from Miguel's apartment in Queens. He would go there after catching a few hours of sleep before his afternoon shift at the restaurant. Sleep, however, proved elusive. Miguel lay on his thin mattress, staring at the water stains on the ceiling as sunlight crept through the single window. In the adjacent kitchen area, his roommates moved about, preparing for their own days of labor. Neither asked why Miguel wasn't sleeping. Each man in the apartment respected the other's exhaustion, their shared understanding of what it meant to chase the American dream, one backbreaking day at a time. When Miguel finally rose and dressed in his one good shirt, a light blue button-down he saved for special occasions, his roommate Ernesto raised an eyebrow. "Job interview?" Ernesto asked in Spanish, stirring sugar into his coffee. Miguel shook his head. "Returning something to someone. Must be important," Ernesto commented, eyeing the pressed shirt. Miguel's hand moved instinctively to his pocket, feeling the outline of the wallet. "It is to them." The subway car rattled beneath Manhattan, carrying Miguel toward the financial district. He clung to the metal pole, watching the tunnel lights flash by, each one bringing him closer to a world he cleaned but never truly entered. Around him, men and women in expensive suits stared at phones or read digital news on tablets, their faces set in expressions of importance and purpose. Miguel had never felt so out of place, so aware of his worn shoes and the calluses on his hands. Yet the wallet in his pocket gave him purpose, a legitimate reason to walk through the gleaming doors of whatever office housed Daniel Harrington. The building, when he found it, stretched toward the sky like a monument to ambition, all glass and steel and confidence. Miguel paused on the sidewalk, tilting his head back to see where the structure disappeared into the morning clouds. People streamed around him, entering through revolving doors with badges already extended toward security scanners. Miguel took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and stepped forward. The security guard at the front desk regarded him with immediate suspicion. "Can I help you?" The question carried the unmistakable tone of, "You don't belong here." "I am here to see Senor Daniel Harrington," Miguel said, working to soften his accent, to appear as though he belonged in this temple of commerce. "I found his wallet." The guard's expression shifted from suspicion to mild surprise. "Mr. Harrington? You found his wallet?" Miguel nodded, producing the leather wallet from his pocket. "I clean at the Carrington building. I found this last night." The guard picked up his phone, speaking quietly into it while maintaining eye contact with Miguel. After a brief exchange, he replaced the receiver. "Someone from Mr. Harrington's office will be down to meet you. Please wait over there." He gestured to a seating area of sleek leather chairs that looked more expensive than Miguel's entire wardrobe. Miguel sat perched on the edge of one chair, uncomfortable against its cool surface. The wallet rested in his hands, and he found himself wondering about the man whose possession he held. What kind of work did he do in this towering building? Did he have a family? Was he kind to the people who cleaned his office after hours? "You must be Miguel." The voice startled him from his thoughts. Miguel looked up to see a tall woman in a tailored charcoal suit, her dark hair pulled back in a severe knot. Her expression was neutral, professional, but not unkind. "Yes, I am Miguel Reyes." He stood quickly, extending the wallet. "I found this. It belongs to Senor Harrington." The woman made no move to take the wallet. "Mr. Harrington would like to thank you personally. Would you mind coming upstairs?" Miguel hesitated, glancing at his watch. His shift at the restaurant began in 2 hours. "I do not want to take much time. I just want to return what is not mine." Something in the woman's expression softened. "It won't take long. Mr. Harrington is quite impressed that you came all this way to return his wallet. Most people would have just mailed it or kept it." The elevator rose smoothly, numbers blinking higher than Miguel had ever traveled in a building before. The woman, who had introduced herself as Andrea Blake, executive assistant to Mr. Harrington, stood beside him in comfortable silence. Miguel felt sweat beading at his temples, the unfamiliarity of the situation pressing in on him. The doors opened to reveal an office space that seemed designed to intimidate, floor-to-ceiling windows offering vertiginous views of the city, modern art adorning walls in splashes of color that somehow seemed calculated rather than joyful, and glass-walled conference rooms where groups of suited individuals gestured at projected figures. Andrea led him through this landscape of power to a corner office. She knocked once, then opened the door without waiting for a response. "Mr. Harrington, this is Miguel Reyes." The man who rose from behind the massive desk was younger than Miguel had expected, perhaps 35 at most, with dark hair just beginning to gray at the temples, and the kind of confidence that came from never having to question one's place in the world. Yet his smile seemed genuine as he crossed the room with extended hand. "Mr. Reyes, thank you for coming all this way. I've been tearing my apartment apart looking for that wallet." Miguel shook the offered hand, noting the smooth skin against his own calluses, then extended the wallet. "I found this while cleaning. I wanted to make sure it got back to you safely." Daniel Harrington accepted the wallet with obvious relief, opening it to check its contents. "Everything's here. You know, there was over $2,000 cash in here. Most people would have kept it." Miguel shook his head. "It is not mine to keep." Something in Harrington's expression changed, a flicker of curiosity perhaps, or reassessment. He gestured toward one of the chairs facing his desk. "Please, sit down for a moment. Andrea, could you bring us some coffee?" Miguel perched again on the edge of a chair worth more than his monthly rent, his discomfort growing. "I do not want to take your time, Senor Harrington. I must go to my other job soon." "Other job?" Harrington settled into his chair. "How many jobs do you have, Mr. Reyes?" "3," Miguel answered simply. "I clean offices at night. I wash dishes at a restaurant in the afternoon. On weekends, I help my neighbor with his moving company." Harrington's eyebrows rose. "That's quite a schedule. May I ask why you work so hard?" The question seemed genuine, not condescending, but Miguel still felt the vast gulf between their worlds. How could he explain to this man in his tailored suit, in his corner office, what it meant to send money home each month, to save every extra dollar toward a dream that seemed to recede with each passing year? "I have responsibilities," Miguel said finally. "And a dream." Before Harrington could respond, Andrea returned with a tray bearing an elegant coffee service. She poured for both men, then discreetly withdrew. "A dream," Harrington repeated, stirring his coffee. "Would you mind sharing what that dream is?" Miguel wrapped his fingers around the delicate porcelain cup, drawing comfort from its warmth. Normally, he kept his aspirations close, protected from the potential ridicule of others. But something in Harrington's expression, an openness, a genuine interest, loosened his guard. "In Guatemala, my family had a restaurant. Nothing fancy, but people came from all around for my mother's cooking. When the violence got bad, we had to leave everything behind." Miguel paused, the memories still raw despite the years that had passed. "I want to open a small restaurant here. Authentic Guatemalan food, but modern. A place my mother would be proud of." Harrington sipped his coffee, watching Miguel over the rim of his cup. "Have you made any progress toward this goal?" Miguel gave a small, tight smile. "I have saved $32,000 over 7 years. But the cost to open even a small restaurant in this city. He shook his head. Sometimes dreams must wait. You know, Harrington said, leaning forward slightly, I'm in the venture capital business. My firm invests in promising businesses across various sectors, including restaurants. Miguel nodded politely, though the terms meant little to him. He was acutely aware of the time passing, of his need to get to his next job. That wallet you returned, Harrington continued, contained more than just cash and credit cards. It had the only USB drive with the presentation I'm giving to investors this afternoon. A presentation about a new fund specifically targeting immigrant entrepreneurs. The coincidence struck Miguel as almost too perfect, too contrived to be real. His expression must have revealed his skepticism, because Harrington laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise even him. I know how that sounds, Harrington admitted, but it's true. My grandparents came from Ireland with nothing. My father built a construction business from the ground up. I've never forgotten those roots, even though my life has been considerably easier. He opened a drawer in his desk and withdrew a business card, sliding it across the polished surface toward Miguel. I'd like to hear more about your restaurant concept, properly with time to discuss details. Would you be willing to come back, perhaps with some notes about your business plan? Miguel stared at the card, its embossed letters catching the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows. Suspicion warred with hope in his chest. Why would you want to hear about my restaurant? Harrington leaned back in his chair, regarding Miguel with that same curious expression. Because honesty is rare, Mr. Reyes. Because you've worked 3 jobs for 7 years without giving up on your dream. And because, if I'm being completely honest, I've been looking for the right first investment for this immigrant entrepreneur fund, and there's a certain poetry to it being you. Miguel's throat tightened unexpectedly. He picked up the card, running his thumb over the raised lettering. I have many ideas, he said quietly. But no formal business plan. That's what my team is for, Harrington replied. We help refine ideas into viable businesses. All we need to start is passion and a solid concept. The rest can be taught. The moment hung between them, fragile as spun glass. Miguel had learned caution in his years in America, had seen too many hopes dashed against the hard edges of reality. And yet, I must go to my job now, he said, rising from the chair and carefully tucking the business card into his wallet, a worn leather billfold that had been repaired multiple times with careful stitches. But I will call to make an appointment. Harrington stood as well, extending his hand once more. I look forward to it, Mr. Reyes. And thank you again for your honesty. The ride down in the elevator felt unreal, as if Miguel might wake at any moment to find himself still on his thin mattress, staring at water stains while the sounds of his roommates preparing for another day of labor filled the tiny apartment. But the business card in his wallet was solid, tangible evidence that the encounter had been real. Outside, the city continued its frantic pace, pedestrians streaming past with determined expressions, yellow taxis honking in perpetual impatience. Miguel stood for a moment on the sidewalk, letting the autumn sunlight warm his face, before checking his watch and hurrying toward the subway station. He couldn't be late for his shift at the restaurant. The kitchen at Belmonte's Italian Bistro was already in full lunch service chaos when Miguel arrived. He slipped in through the back entrance, changing quickly into the stained white uniform that marked him as one of the invisible people who kept the restaurant functioning, essential but unseen by the diners enjoying their expensive pasta dishes and wine. You're almost late? Roberto, the head chef, called over his shoulder as he plated a delicate arrangement of seared scallops. Everything okay? Yes, just had an errand, Miguel replied, taking his position at the sink where a mountain of dirty pots and cooking implements awaited him. For the next 6 hours, Miguel's world narrowed to the rhythmic work of scrubbing, rinsing, stacking. The hot water turned his hands red, the industrial soap leaving them dry and cracked, despite the rubber gloves he wore. The noise of the kitchen, shouted orders, clattering plates, the sizzle of food hitting hot pans, formed a familiar soundtrack to his labor. Usually, Miguel could lose himself in the mechanical nature of the work, his mind drifting to memories of home or calculations of his savings. Today, however, his thoughts kept returning to the business card in his wallet, to Daniel Harrington's unexpected offer. Was it genuine? And if it was, what would it mean? You're somewhere else today, Roberto commented during a brief lull between lunch and dinner service. The chef leaned against the counter near Miguel's station, wiping his hands on a towel. Got a woman on your mind? Miguel smiled but shook his head. A different kind of dream. Maybe a chance. Roberto raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. In the kitchen hierarchy, dishwashers and prep cooks lived in different worlds despite working side by side. Roberto, with his culinary school training and ambitions of someday having his own restaurant, rarely engaged Miguel in conversation beyond the necessary communication of kitchen work. "Well, whatever it is," Roberto said, straightening as the first dinner tickets began printing, "don't let it distract you tonight. We're fully booked and short a line cook." The dinner rush descended with its usual intensity, and Miguel pushed thoughts of business plans and venture capital aside, focusing on the immediate demands of dirty pots and pans that seemed to materialize faster than he could clean them. It wasn't until nearly midnight, as he trudged up the 3 flights of stairs to his apartment, that Miguel allowed himself to revisit the morning's encounter. His body ached with the familiar pain of long hours of physical labor, his mind foggy with exhaustion. Yet beneath the fatigue burned a small, persistent flame of hope. The apartment was dark and quiet when he entered. His roommates would already be asleep, needing to rise before dawn for their own jobs. Miguel moved silently through the cramped space, careful not to disturb them as he prepared for bed. Tomorrow was Saturday, moving day with his neighbor Javier's company. Another 12 hours of hauling furniture up and down stairs for people who could afford to hire others for such labor. Lying on his mattress, staring once again at the water stains that had become as familiar as constellations, Miguel withdrew Harrington's business card from his wallet. In the dim light filtering through the thin curtains, the embossed letters were barely visible, but he traced them with his fingertip, feeling the raised edges like a promise. "A restaurant," he whispered to the darkness, allowing himself to imagine it for the first time in years. Not just as a distant dream, but as a possibility. A small space, perhaps in Queens or Brooklyn, where rents were at least somewhat manageable. Tables crafted from reclaimed wood. His mother's recipes, passed down through generations, adapted for American ingredients but true to their Guatemalan soul. Sleep claimed him as he held the vision in his mind, the business card still clutched in his hand like a talisman. Saturday passed in a blur of heavy lifting and careful maneuvering of expensive furniture through narrow doorways. Javier's moving company catered to young professionals moving into increasingly gentrified neighborhoods, people with disposable income but not quite enough to hire the premium moving services advertised on billboards throughout the city. Miguel worked methodically, his body moving through the familiar patterns of lift, carry, place, return. His mind, however, was elsewhere, sketching floor plans for a small restaurant, calculating potential costs, imagining the menu that would showcase his mother's recipes while appealing to American palates and expectations. "You're quiet today, amigo," Javier commented as they drove between jobs, the small truck navigating Brooklyn's congested streets. "Everything okay with your mama?" Miguel's mother's health was a constant concern, her diabetes requiring medication that consumed a significant portion of the money he sent home each month. "She is the same," he replied, "but I had a strange meeting yesterday. A possibility, maybe." He found himself telling Javier about the wallet, about Daniel Harrington and his Immigrant Entrepreneur Fund. Saying it aloud made it seem simultaneously more real and more fantastical, like a folk tale that contained both truth and impossibility. Javier listened, his expression shifting from interest to skepticism. "These rich guys?" he said finally, shaking his head. "They like to feel good about themselves by pretending to help people like us. Be careful, Miguel. Don't let him waste your time with empty promises." The warning settled like a weight in Miguel's stomach. He knew Javier spoke from experience. The older man had been in America nearly 20 years and had seen countless dreams wither under the harsh light of reality. Yet Miguel couldn't quite surrender the spark that had been kindled in Harrington's office. "I will be careful," he assured Javier. "But I must try. For my mother, for myself." Sunday morning found Miguel seated at the small folding table that served as both dining surface and desk in the apartment's kitchen area. His roommates had gone to church, leaving him alone with a notepad and the laptop he had purchased secondhand 2 years ago. The ancient machine wheezed and groaned as he searched for information on business plans, restaurant startup costs, and venture capital investments. The terminology was often beyond his English comprehension, requiring multiple searches and translations. By afternoon, his notepad was filled with figures and questions, his head swimming with concepts like return on investment, profit margins, and scalability. One thing became clear: opening even a small restaurant in New York City would require far more capital than he had managed to save over 7 years of constant labor. If Harrington's offer was genuine, it represented Miguel's only realistic path to achieving his dream within the next decade. Monday morning, Miguel rose earlier than usual, his stomach tight with anticipation and anxiety. He had called the number on Harrington's card the previous evening, half expecting to reach a generic voicemail or disinterested assistant. Instead, Andrea had answered personally, scheduling him for a 9 a.m. meeting with apparent ease. "Mr. Harrington specifically blocked this time for you," she had explained. "He's quite interested in hearing your concept." Now, dressed again in his one good shirt, Miguel made his way back to the towering glass building in the financial district. The security guard from Friday nodded in recognition as Miguel approached the desk. "Back to see Mr. Harrington?" he asked, already reaching for the phone. "Yes. I have an appointment." The word appointment felt strange on Miguel's tongue, a luxury he had rarely experienced. His life was governed by shifts and schedules, not appointments. Appointments were for people who controlled their own time. The elevator ride was no less intimidating the second time, but Miguel stood straighter, his notepad clutched in one hand like a shield. Andrea met him as the doors opened, her professional smile warming slightly in recognition. "Good morning, Mr. Reyes. Mr. Harrington is looking forward to your meeting. Can I get you coffee before you start?" "Thank you, yes," Miguel replied, following her through the maze of glass offices and open workspaces. Today, he noticed details he had missed in Friday's haze of disbelief: the framed photographs of restaurants on one wall, the small plaque identifying the firm as Harrington Ventures Building Tomorrow's Success Stories. Daniel Harrington rose from behind his desk as Miguel entered, extending his hand with the same genuine smile. "Mr. Reyes, thank you for coming back. I was afraid you might decide I was crazy or insincere." Miguel shook the offered hand, managing a small smile of his own. "My friend Javier thinks you are probably both, but I decided to find out for myself." Harrington laughed, the sound startling in its authenticity. "Your friend Javier is probably wise to be suspicious. Please sit down. Andrea will bring coffee, and then I'd like to hear about this restaurant of yours." This time, Miguel sat more fully in the chair, though he remained perched near its edge. He placed his notepad on his knee, suddenly self-conscious of its cheapness, of the ragged edge where pages had been torn out, and the ballpoint pen marks that had bled through multiple sheets. "I made some notes," he began, "but I do not have a formal business plan. I tried to research, but some concepts were difficult." Harrington waved away the concern. "That's why we have a team here. They can help with the formal documentation later. For now, I want to hear your vision. Tell me about this restaurant as if you were describing it to someone you wanted to impress." The request caught Miguel off guard. He had prepared figures and potential locations, had researched food costs and labor needs. But Harrington wanted the dream itself, not its practical scaffolding. Andrea arrived with coffee, placing delicate cups before each of them before withdrawing discreetly. Miguel wrapped his hands around the warm porcelain, drawing comfort from its heat as he had on Friday. "My mother's kitchen in Guatemala," he began hesitantly, "always smelled of cumin and cinnamon, of corn masa toasting on the comal, of chilies and onions sizzling in oil. People from our village would come just to sit at our table, to taste her pepián and jocón, her relenitos and chuchitos. She cooked with whatever was fresh from the market that day, adapting traditional recipes to what was available and affordable." As he spoke, Miguel found himself transported back to that small, warm kitchen, the heart of his childhood home before violence and economic necessity had scattered his family across borders and oceans. The memories flowed more easily than he had expected, and with them came the vision of what could be. "I want to create a place that feels like my mother's kitchen but looks toward the future. Traditional Guatemalan dishes made with local ingredients, presented in ways that honor both cultures. Not fusion, that word has lost its meaning, but evolution. Recognition that recipes, like people, change when they cross borders." Harrington listened with unexpected intensity, occasionally nodding but never interrupting. Encouraged by his attention, Miguel continued, describing the intimate space he envisioned, the curated menu that would change seasonally, the bar program featuring Central American spirits rarely showcased in New York. The restaurant would be called Raíces y Alas, Roots and Wings, Miguel concluded, "because that is what my mother gave me and what I hope to give to others through food." When he finally fell silent, Miguel was surprised to find that nearly an hour had passed. His coffee sat untouched and cold beside him. Harrington had not taken a single note, had not glanced at his phone or watch. He had simply listened, with the kind of focused attention that Miguel realized was perhaps the rarest currency in this city of perpetual distraction. That, Harrington said finally, is exactly the kind of vision our Immigrant Entrepreneur Fund was created to support. Miguel waited for the qualifications, for the but that would transform possibility back into pipe dream. When none came, he ventured, "You are serious about this investment?" "Completely serious," Harrington confirmed. "In fact, I'd like to bring in Rachel Park, our restaurant specialist. She's worked with several successful launches in the city. If you're comfortable, I think she should hear your concept directly from you." Before Miguel could respond, Harrington had pressed a button on his desk phone and requested Rachel's presence. Minutes later, a woman with short black hair and an assessing gaze entered the office. Miguel repeated his vision, more confidently this time, while Rachel took rapid notes on a tablet. "The location will be crucial," she said when he had finished. "Have you scouted any specific neighborhoods?" Miguel nodded, opening his notepad to the list of potential areas he had researched. Jackson Heights has a growing Central American population. Sunset Park, perhaps. Even Bushwick might work, though rents are rising quickly. Rachel's eyebrows rose slightly at his preparedness. "I know of a space in Jackson Heights that might be perfect. It was a Colombian restaurant until about 3 months ago. The owner retired and the building hasn't been leased yet." The conversation shifted into practicalities, square footage needs, equipment costs, potential customer demographics. Miguel found himself answering questions with increasing confidence, his years of quiet observation and research proving more valuable than he had realized. By the time the meeting concluded nearly 3 hours later, a preliminary plan had taken shape. Harrington Ventures would provide the majority of the capital investment, with Miguel contributing his savings and sweat equity. Rachel would arrange for Miguel to tour the Jackson Heights space later that week. A formal business plan would be developed with the help of the firm's team. As Miguel rose to leave, still slightly dazed by the swift transformation of dream into potential reality, Harrington extended his hand once more. "Thank you for trusting us with your vision, Mr. Reyes. And thank you again for returning my wallet. It seems the universe has a sense of poetry after all." Miguel shook the offered hand, finding words inadequate to express the hurricane of emotions swirling within him. "I will work very hard to make this successful," he promised finally. "For my mother, for myself, and for your investment, I have no doubt," Harrington replied with that same genuine smile. "Some people spend their whole lives looking for their purpose. You've known yours all along. You just needed the right door to open." On the elevator ride down, Miguel allowed himself a moment of pure, uncomplicated joy. He thought of his mother, of the phone call he would make tonight to tell her that her recipes would live on in a new country, that her teachings had not been lost in the journey across borders. He thought of the hard years of labor that had seemed endless, but had led somehow to this moment of possibility. The security guard nodded as Miguel passed through the lobby. Outside, the autumn sun had broken through the morning clouds, casting golden light across the city's endless facades. Miguel paused on the sidewalk, tilting his face toward the warmth, feeling for the first time in years that he was not merely surviving in this city, but beginning, at last, to belong. He had 3 more shifts at the Carrington building, 2 at the restaurant, and a weekend of moving furniture ahead before he could fully dedicate himself to the new venture. Months of planning, renovation, and preparation still stretched before him. The dream would require more hard work, more sacrifice, more uncertainty. But as Miguel descended into the subway station, joining the river of humanity flowing beneath the city, he carried with him something he had almost forgotten: hope, as tangible as the business card in his wallet, as fragrant as the spices of his mother's kitchen, as real as the chance encounter that had changed everything. An immigrant janitor had returned a lost wallet, unaware it held the keys to his own dream business. Now, those keys were firmly in his grasp, and the door they would open beckoned with the promise of a future shaped by his own hands. 6 months later, Miguel stood in the center of a small restaurant in Jackson Heights, watching as the morning sunlight streamed through the newly installed windows. The space smelled of fresh paint and polished wood, of possibility and promise. In the kitchen, equipment gleamed, waiting for the first preparations to begin. The journey from that fateful meeting in Harrington's office to this moment had been neither straight nor simple. There had been permit delays, unexpected construction issues, moments of doubt and fear. Miguel had worked his cleaning job until the very last possible night, building up additional savings for the inevitable unexpected expenses. But now, 1 week before the grand opening of Raíces y Alas, Miguel could finally see his vision taking physical form. The tables, crafted from reclaimed wood as he had imagined, were arranged intimately throughout the space. The bar, with its carefully curated selection of Central American spirits, stood ready to welcome guests. In the kitchen, his mother's recipes, carefully transcribed and adapted, waited in a handwritten notebook. The door opened, bell chiming softly, and Daniel Harrington entered. In the months since their first meeting, the venture capitalist had become something Miguel had never expected. A friend. Their worlds remained vastly different, but a genuine respect had grown between them, bridging gaps of experience and privilege. "It looks amazing," Harrington said, surveying the space with evident appreciation. "Even better than the renderings." Miguel nodded, pride warming his chest. "The tile work was finished yesterday, and the sign will be installed tomorrow." They walked through the restaurant together, Harrington asking questions about final details, while Miguel explained his choices: the hand-woven textiles that adorned one wall, the photographs of Guatemala that lined another, the custom plates commissioned from an artist in his home village. "Oh, I almost forgot," Harrington said as they completed the tour. "I brought something for opening night." He handed Miguel a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. Miguel unwrapped it carefully to reveal a leather wallet, its surface supple and rich, clearly expensive but understated. "To replace your old one," Harrington explained. It seemed fitting. Miguel ran his fingers over the soft leather, remembering the worn billfold that had accompanied him through years of labor and saving. "Thank you," he said simply, understanding the symbolism of the gift. "There's something inside," Harrington added. Miguel opened the wallet to find a photograph, his mother standing in front of a small building, her smile radiant despite the visible fatigue in her eyes. It was a picture he had shown Harrington months ago when explaining why he had left Guatemala, why he worked so hard to send money home. "How did you get this?" Miguel asked, confused. Harrington smiled, a hint of nervousness uncharacteristic for the confident businessman. "That's actually the other surprise. Turn around." Miguel turned toward the restaurant entrance and felt his heart stop. There, framed in the doorway, stood his mother. Older than in the photograph, her hair now streaked with gray, but unmistakably, impossibly present. "Mama?" The word escaped as barely a whisper. She stepped forward, tears already streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Miguel, mi hijo." They collided in an embrace that contained 7 years of separation, of sacrifice, of love sustained across distance and borders. Miguel buried his face in his mother's shoulder, inhaling the scent that had formed his earliest memories: cinnamon and cumin, warmth and home. "How?" he managed finally, drawing back to look at her face, to assure himself she was real. "Your friend helped with the visa," his mother replied in Spanish, gesturing toward Harrington, who stood watching with suspiciously bright eyes. "He said you needed me for the restaurant, that no one else could teach the staff properly." Miguel turned to Harrington, words failing him completely. "Chef consultant visa," Harrington explained with a small shrug. "Perfectly legitimate. Your mother is the original creator of these recipes, after all. The restaurant needs her expertise during the launch phase, and possibly beyond. She can stay?" Miguel asked, hardly daring to hope. "We're working on a more permanent arrangement," Harrington confirmed. "But for now, yes, she's here legally for at least a year." Miguel's mother squeezed his hand, her eyes taking in the restaurant, the physical manifestation of dreams she had nurtured in him since childhood. "You did it," she said softly. "You made something beautiful in this new place." "We did it," Miguel corrected, including both his mother and Harrington in his gaze. "I could not have done this alone." Later that evening, after Harrington had departed and Miguel had settled his mother in the small apartment he had recently rented for himself, no more shared space, no more lockbox for his few possessions, they sat together at the kitchen table, talking late into the night. 7 years of stories compressed into hours, laughter and tears flowing freely between them. As midnight approached, Miguel's mother reached across the table to take his hand, her touch achingly familiar despite the years of absence. "I always knew you would find your way," she said. "Even when you were a boy, you understood that some dreams require patience, require sacrifice." Miguel thought of the wallet that had changed everything, of the chance encounter that had opened doors he had thought permanently closed to someone like him. "Sometimes," he replied, "dreams also require a little help, a little luck." His mother nodded, wisdom in her tired eyes. "The world gives back what you put into it, mihijo. You have always given honesty, hard work, kindness. Now the world begins to return these gifts." 1 week later, as Miguel stood at the entrance of Raíces y Alas on opening night, watching as guests filled every table, as his mother directed the kitchen with the authority of decades of experience, as the sounds of laughter and conversation rose beneath the soft lighting he had so carefully selected, he felt the truth of her words settle in his chest. Daniel Harrington arrived with several colleagues, accepting Miguel's grateful welcome with characteristic grace. "This is your night," he insisted when Miguel tried to thank him again. "You built this. We just provided the tools." As the evening progressed, Miguel moved through the space he had created, greeting guests, ensuring each detail met his exacting standards. In the kitchen, his mother orchestrated the dance of preparation and plating, her recipes coming to life under her watchful eye. At the bar, cocktails featuring Guatemalan rum and local ingredients flowed steadily. Near midnight, as the final diners lingered over dessert and coffee, Miguel stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The autumn air carried a hint of coming winter, but inside, his restaurant glowed with warmth and life. Through the windows, he could see his mother laughing with the sous chef, could see Harrington raising a glass in toast to something a companion had said. 7 years ago, Miguel had arrived in New York with nothing but determination and his mother's recipes committed to memory. He had cleaned offices while others slept, had washed dishes while others dined, had carried furniture while others settled into new homes. He had sent money home each month without fail, had saved every extra dollar, had held tight to a dream that often seemed impossible. Now, standing before the illuminated sign that bore the name he had chosen, Raíces y Alas, Roots and Wings, Miguel understood that his journey had been not just about achieving a personal goal, but about creating something that connected past to future, homeland to new land, sacrifice to fulfillment. An immigrant janitor had returned a lost wallet, unaware it held the keys to his own dream business. But perhaps, Miguel thought as he turned to rejoin the warmth and light of the world he had created, he had always carried those keys within himself, in his integrity, in his perseverance, in his refusal to surrender the vision of what might be possible in this city of endless dreams.